I don't know if it was an exhaustive investigation. We have gone through some 4,000 different classified cables leading up to the event, talked to people on the ground during the event, done the post-mortem on the event through the committee investigation.
So,
and found
what did they
something
get wrong?
That Al-Qaeda was not involved in this.
The intelligence indicates that Al-Qaeda was involved, but there were also plenty of people and militias that were unaffiliated with Al-Qaeda that were involved.
Members of the Intelligence Committee in the House reacting to the New York Times article over the weekend, an extensive analysis of the Benghazi attack of September 11th, 2012, in which the New York Times concluded there was no Al-Qaeda connection among any of the militants who took part in that attack. Let's bring in our panel now. Steve Hayes, who's the senior writer for the Weekly Standard, Kirsten Powers, columnist for the Daily Beast, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Stephen, let's start with you because you took this on in an article in the Weekly Standard. You said that the New York Times, David Kirkpatrick, did extensive reporting on the ground but missed a few key points.
Yeah, I think he missed on the big conclusions. I think his reporting was in many respects terrific. I mean, the details that he provided about the inside of the mother's house of one of the chief suspects of the Benghazi attacks, fantastic on-the-ground, minute-by-minute reporting. Where he made a mistake, I think, is drawing sweeping conclusions that weren't justified either by his reporting or by the body of evidence that's been collected about these attacks since. And his main mistake, I think, was declaring in a very categorical way that there was no Al-Qaeda involvement and no involvement of international terrorist groups. We know for a fact that the Mohammed Jamal Network, members of the Mohammed Jamal Network, which is an international organization based largely in Cairo in Egypt, run by a guy with close ties to Ayman al-Zawahiri and other senior Al-Qaeda leaders, was involved in this attack. We know that other international terrorists, we know that terrorists from around the region were involved, were participants in this attack. We know that communications went out between folks involved in the attack and others outside, connected with Al-Qaeda, discussing this attack. So it's very clear that there were not only ties, but strong ties. Now, nobody's suggesting that Ayman al-Zawahiri was sitting in Pakistan and said, you go do this attack and do it in this way. Nobody's suggesting that. But at the same time, you know, among those examples that I've provided, there was another one, an attacker who later collected information, and we were told at the Weekly Standard delivered that information back to senior Al-Qaeda leadership in Pakistan. So there were clearly Al-Qaeda ties. It's a stretch to say that there weren't, and it's inaccurate to say that, to make a sweeping and categorical claim that Al-Qaeda and international groups had nothing to do with this.
Kirsten, you make the point that focusing all of this in Al-Qaeda really is kind of focusing on the wrong thing.
It's a little bit of a straw man argument in the sense, if you remember what the outcry was about after Susan Rice went on the shows, at that point nobody really knew who did it, but there was a pretty good sense that it was a terrorist attack, and the administration wasn't calling it a terrorist attack, and they took quite some time actually until they did finally come out and say that. And so it wasn't about it was Al-Qaeda per se, even though I think there is a lot of evidence to show that there were Al-Qaeda affiliated groups. At a minimum, they're affiliated, maybe not core Al-Qaeda, but that what the description that the administration was giving just wasn't accurate. That, you know, there's people that were out, they were upset about a video, and they sort of, you know, haphazardly attacked, did this attack in Benghazi, which actually Kirkpatrick's reporting, you know, he does say it was a terrorist attack. Well, that really was something the administration was very slow on coming around to.
Right. Charles, Stephen also included in his article the fact that the reporting from the New York Times over the weekend contradicts with reporting the New York Times did a year prior when it said that Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, the Mohammed Jamal Network with Al-Qaeda ties, were involved in this, according to administration officials.
That's what's wrong with his reporting. If he had just said, I wasn't able to find any ties to Al-Qaeda and these networks, you would have disputed that, but at least that would have been a circumscribed statement. He shone the flashlight on a part of the crime scene, and he wasn't able to locate these links. But he went way beyond that and said there are no such ties. If you say that, then you can't only rely on your reporting. You then have to refute all the evidence from Mike Rogers, all the cables he saw that Kirkpatrick obviously hasn't seen, all the evidence collected from eyewitnesses, all the sources that Jennifer Griffin and others at Fox have who aren't able to come out into the open, but clearly she's spoken to huge number who contradict every element of this story. So unless he can come out and show us why all of that is untrue, his statement hangs out there as a guess and one that doesn't look right. He should have stuck to his own reporting, in which case we wouldn't have the firestorm over this, where clearly he overstepped and clearly what he's saying is not so.
And that's a key point, just to follow up on that. He was on Meet the Press yesterday, and David Gregory asked, you say that there was no al-Qaeda involvement, and his comment was, I honestly think if you asked anybody in the U.S. intelligence business, they would tell you the same thing. Well, that's just not true. I mean, I literally have spoken to numbers of people in the U.S. intelligence business who say there were al-Qaeda.
You talk about this difference between core al-Qaeda and other al-Qaeda groups. That was the line that came out of the State Department today. Let's listen to what spokeswoman Marie Harf said on that today.
No indications at this point that core al-Qaeda directed or planned what happened in Benghazi. We do know, as we've said from the beginning, that extremists were involved. These folks don't carry ID cards. They don't come out and wear a T-shirt that says "I belong to al-Qaeda."
Let me ask you about this idea of core al-Qaeda versus other al-Qaeda groups. I don't think most Americans say, "Oh, that's core al-Qaeda and this is another al-Qaeda group." With so many different al-Qaeda groups out there, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and the Islamic Maghreb, all the other groups, has al-Qaeda changed to the point where it's no longer a centrally directed organization? It's more an ideology that many different groups follow, but those groups are still al-Qaeda.
Yeah. I just want to say what she just said is actually not correct. They didn't, in the very beginning, say it was extremist. It was just a bunch of people out for a walk who got upset about a video and attacked. I mean, that was sort of spontaneously attacked. So I think that, again, I think it's a straw man argument. I don't think it matters whether it's core al-Qaeda or whether it's somebody who's affiliated with al-Qaeda. If you are affiliated with the head of al-Qaeda, then I think that makes you, al-Qaeda in some way. But at the end of the day, it's not, I don't think that's the fundamental issue. The issue is that this was a terrorist attack, not a protest.
One final point, Charles, if I could. New York Times editorial editor Andrew Rosenthal defended the story today in a blog, saying that this is all about politics. He said, quote, "The Republicans hope to tarnish Democratic candidates by making it seem as though Mr. Obama doesn't take al-Qaeda seriously. They also want to throw mud at former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who they fear will run for president in 2016. Is this all about politics?
Well, I think he gave the game away. By being defensive about this, he's making it quite obvious the reason that the Times invested all the effort and time in this and put it on the front page is precisely a way to protect the Democrats, to deflect the issue, to protect Hillary, who is exposed on this issue as almost no issue in her tenure in the administration. It is obviously a political move. But just one point on that State Department spokesman. Saying it's not al-Qaeda because it isn't core al-Qaeda is absurd. It's like saying that if the Greek resistance in the Second World War launched an attack on a Nazi outpost, it wasn't part of the Allied effort if they hadn't gotten a direct order from Churchill. Obviously, these are elements in the struggle. They are all united, in a sense, in their ideology and often in their links. And that's all you got to know.
All right, let's leave it there, because coming up next,